read a short story to her class and then ask the class to describe what happened in the story. Ms. Simmons wants to increase the time it takes for the class to respond when asked to describe the story so that they will spend more time thinking about the story. What type of data should she take? Longer questions, okay? Longer questions, we need to slow down. We need to first recognize what the question is asking, and then we need to understand what's important from the question and what's not. First things first, the question is asking what type of data should she take? Clearly a measurement question. Looking at the answer choices, it's a continuous measurement question, so it's going to be pretty straightforward. We don't have to eliminate any discontinuous measurements. All we need to do is pick the appropriate continuous measurement. What is Ms. Simmons trying to accomplish? Well, it tells us right in the question that she wants to increase the time it takes for the class to respond when asked to describe the story so that they will spend more time thinking about the story. If Ms. Simmons is asking for the class to respond, and then the class does respond, the time in between those two things is considered what? Well, let's think about it. Ms. Simmons asking the class to respond is going to be the SD. The class describing the story and responding is the response. So we're looking for the time in between the SD and the response. And if she wants to increase that, what does she need to increase? Does she need to increase into response time, IRT, the time in between responses? No, we're only worried about the one response at this time. And that's the main difference between latency and IRT. Latency, you're worried about the first response from the SD. Into response time, you're worried about all the other responses and the time in between those responses. In this case, though, what we're really looking for is latency. Ms. Simmons says, ask for a response or ask the class to respond to the story. The class does. She wants to increase that. She needs to increase the latency. Now, what about duration? With duration, we're not looking for the total time of, let's say, the description, okay? This is the time in between something. And time in between is going to be IRT and latency. And then rate, of course, is just frequency over time. There's no count. We're not counting anything. We are simply measuring the time in between the SD and the response, which is latency. On measurement questions, the way they describe the question, as long as you can match the definition of your measurement, of your terms, to what they're doing, measurement questions are very straightforward. That's all we did here. Identify the SD, identify the response, identify what we're trying to measure, and then pick the best term available. Question 2, you are conducting an observation as part of an assessment for a new client. During the observation, you record the things you observe as they happen. This most closely describes what type of assessment. Our three major assessments are what? We have indirect, we have direct, we have a functional analysis. An indirect assessment, of course, we aren't actually observing the client. So ask yourself, am I observing the client? In this case, you are, right? You're conducting an observation for a new client and you're recording things as you observe them, right? We can eliminate indirect assessment. Since we can eliminate indirect assessment, we can also eliminate survey recording. Surveys, interviews, these type of things typically don't involve direct observation. They're indirect. We can eliminate them. What about a functional analysis? A functional analysis, RBTs assist in functional analysis. They don't typically do them on their own, rarely ever, if ever. With a functional analysis, we're actually manipulating antecedents and consequences to determine the function. So this typically involves intentionally reinforcing behaviors to try and determine, is that the reason the behavior is occurring? In this case, are you manipulating antecedents and consequences? No, you're just recording things as they happen. So you can eliminate functional analysis. It leaves you with narrative recording and event recording. Event recording is essentially just frequency recording. Okay, just another name for frequency recording, all things considered. So really, since you're actually recording things as you observe them happen in a long form way, you're really taking narrative data. And the key difference there is with event recording, you're basically counting how many times something happens. and you're just taking tally marks or you're using a clicker counter. With narrative recording, as you observe, you're actually writing out what you see. So if you are taking observation data and you're recording the things you observe as they happen, you're most likely taking narrative recording data. You and your friends went out for St. Patrick's Day. You spent all day at a bar. Around 1 a.m., the bartender took away the drink she gave you and cut you off for bad behavior. The bartender is attempting what? Now, I phrased it this way because, as always, if we're looking at reinforcement and punishment, we need to look at what? We need to look at how they affect future behavior. However, on the exam, if you get a reinforcement and punishment question and there's no option other than reinforcement and punishment, then you're just going to have to pick the best one available and what we think we're attempting. Okay. And that's what we're doing here. What is the bartender attempting to accomplish by cutting off the drinks and taking away the drinks in response to bad behavior? That's what you have to ask yourself on behavior questions. What is my SD? What are my responses? What are my consequences? What are we trying to achieve? Now, clearly, if you are engaging in this bad behavior, the bartender is most likely attempting to reduce the bad behavior. So are we looking at reinforcement or are we looking at punishment? If we're looking at behavior reduction, we're looking at punishment. Now, ask yourself, was something added or was something taken away? Well, she took away the drinks, cut off your access to the drinks. That is removal. That's going to be negative. So if we're removing something, if we're cutting off something in an attempt to reduce behavior, we are trying negative punishment. For reinforcement and punishment questions, especially if you're just starting to study, you should break down each one that way. You're going to get much faster as you do more, but you don't need to be fast in the beginning. When you first start studying, don't worry about your speed. Speed's going to come the better you get at the exam, the more fluent you get in your definitions. But in the beginning, we still need to go through each behavior, identify components, and break it down that way. I still have times where I go step by step and say, okay, here's my SD, here's my response, here's my consequence. How is that consequence affecting future behavior? Okay, I've got negative punishment. That's how you need to be studying, okay? Go slow at first. As you get better at the test, speed will come. All right, what type of measurement commonly underestimates behavior? When we talk about underestimating behavior or overestimating behavior, typically we're talking about discontinuous measurement. And why is that? Well, discontinuous measurement, we're not measuring every instance of behavior. With continuous measurement, we are measuring every instance of behavior, so we really shouldn't be underestimating or overestimating anything. Discontinuous measurement, you might only capture 10 minutes of behavior out of a 3-hour session. And while that data is useful, it does serve a purpose, sometimes we're not getting the full picture. So when we talk about underestimating and overestimating, what do we mean? If we're talking about overestimating, we're talking about our data indicating the behavior is happening more than it actually is. Underestimating is doing the opposite. It's happening less than it actually is. So we can, of course, eliminate duration and frequency. Those are continuous. We're looking at whole interval and partial interval. Now, if we're underestimating behavior, we're indicating that behavior is happening less than it actually is. So think about this. If I'm taking whole interval data and I've got 20-second intervals, how long does that behavior need to occur? And the behavior needs to occur 20 seconds. What if my behavior occurs 19 seconds? My data is going to indicate the behavior didn't happen. And if that happens for each interval, so each interval that behavior happens for 19 seconds, on my data sheet, it's going to look like the behavior didn't happen at all. That would severely underestimate the behavior. With partial interval, think about it the other way. How often does that behavior need to happen? Well, for a single second. So let's say that behavior happens for 1 second in each interval. On my data sheet, it's going to look like that behavior never stopped happening, when in reality, it might only happen for 10, 15 seconds. So what type of measurement commonly underestimates behavior? It's going to be whole interval. Again, if I have a 20-second interval and that behavior happens only for 19 seconds, my data is going to indicate the behavior didn't happen at all. That is underestimating how often that behavior happens. A parent tells you and your supervisor that her son learned how to eat with a spoon, but he will only use the spoon if he is verbally told to use the spoon. The son is most likely what? What's occurring in this situation? The son has this skill. When you eat with a spoon, do you need someone to tell you to eat with a spoon? No, you can just, if you're eating a bowl of something, you know to grab a spoon, start eating. If someone has a spoon next to you at a restaurant for, let's say, soup, you don't need anyone to tell you, okay, to use that spoon. You just start using that spoon, right? There's SDs signaling that reinforcement is available if you use the spoon. In this case, however, the son knows how to use the spoon, but only starts or only uses the spoon after verbally being told to use the spoon. What we're really concerned about is this verbally told part. That verbally told part is functioning as a what? It's functioning as a prompt. Let's say the son sits down with a meal and there's a spoon and he starts using his hands and the spoon is right there and the parent has to verbally prompt him to use the spoon. What is the son most likely afflicted with, right? Because he knows how to do this skill, but he only does it after prompts. What does that sound like? If you can do something, or if a learner can do something, but will only do the response after a prompt, they are most likely what? Are they engaging in escape behavior? Well, it doesn't seem like the son is engaging in escape behavior. If he's using the spoon after being told to use the spoon, he's not trying to escape the spoon. Okay. He just needs extra prompting. Now, of course, we don't want him to be reliant on that prompt to use the spoon. We just want him to use the spoon. But he is not, from the information given, engaging in escape behavior. What about B? Lacking the proper motivation to use the spoon. Again, there's no indication he's lacking motivation to use the spoon. If the food requires the spoon, and after being told to use the spoon, he uses the spoon, motivation doesn't necessarily seem to be the issue. It seems to be starting the response without a prompt. What about unable to use the spoon? Well, we know he is able to use the spoon. He learned how to eat with a spoon. And if he's verbally told to use the spoon, he has no problem using the spoon. What's really going on is the son is most likely experiencing prompt dependency. Now, prompt dependency questions on the RBT exam will probably be more clear than this, but I always try to go a little more difficult if I can to get you thinking a little more. Prompt dependency is what? Prompt dependency is the reliance on a prompt to engage in a learned behavior. Okay. What'll happen is, as kids get older, if we never fade out these prompts, they continue to be reliant on prompts to engage in day-to-day responses. For instance, if I learn to dress myself and I'm always getting hand over handed to pull up my pants and put on my shirt, if I never fade out the hand over hand prompts, okay, I might always be dependent on hand over hand prompts to dress myself. In this case, the son is very reliant on being verbally told to use the spoon each time. That has to start being faded out so we can eliminate this prompt dependency. Prompt dependency is one of the worst things that can happen because as you get older, or as clients get older, it becomes harder and harder to fade those prompts, and it becomes a lot less socially valid to be reliant on those prompts. In this case, the son needs a verbal prompt to use the spoon. He is prompt dependent. Okay, one of my favorite questions, if you've been following along, the primary role of an RBT is what? And I ask this question all the time because it's very important, and they're going to want to know on the exam that you understand what the primary role of the RBT is. It's very clear in the ethical code and the task list as well. So is the primary role of an RBT parent training? No. What does the RBT do? The RBT assist in parent training. Same as assessment. The RBT assist in assessment. Now the RBT is going to engage or perform preference assessments on their own, right? But for the most part, and especially for big client assessments, for functional behavior assessments, the primary role is to just assist. Does the RBT conduct supervision? No. The RBT's primary role is implementation. The supervisor, the BCBA, creates the treatment plan, creates the behavior plan. The RBT implements that plan, collects data on that plan. This is a huge role on our team, right? Some people think it's demeaning, right? Or we're taking the RBT for granted when we say, well, your job is just implementation. But that's not the case at all, because the RBT is there much more often typically than the supervisor. So as a good RBT, if you are really effective at implementing treatment plan and behavior plans, okay, you're going to be very effective at giving feedback to the supervisor and to the team on what works, what doesn't work, how things are going, etc. Implementation is just as important as the behavior plan and the treatment plan and the assessment. As a BCBA, if I design the best treatment plan possible, but the implementation is poor, it doesn't matter. So implementation is just as important as everything else, right? So just because you're assisting in these other things, your primary job is implementation, and you're the primary person who will be implementing these things. Okay, so the primary role of the RBT is implementation. During an indirect interview, a BCBA asks a stakeholder about the concerns regarding the client's behavior. The BCBA is really interested in why the behavior is occurring. The BCBA wants to know the what. Okay, what's the dead giveaway here? The dead giveaway is why the behavior is occurring. Now, that's our primary concern when we're first evaluating any behavior, is why it happens. Now, we can talk about how it looks, the intensity of it, how we're going to measure it. What we're really worried about, though, why it's occurring. And if we want to know why it's occurring, what do we want to know? Do we want to know the topography, what it looks like? Yes, it's going to help. But if they're asking about why the behavior is occurring specifically, they're really concerned with the function. The 4 functions are tangible, attention, escape, automatic. Those are the reasons behavior occurs. If the BCBA is concerned with why the behavior is occurring, they want to know the function. We can't choose measurement yet because we aren't there. And then hierarchy has nothing to do with why the behavior is occurring. The BCBA simply wants to know the function. Okay, if there was a motivating operation present for a reinforcer, but the reinforcer was unavailable, what would be missing to signal the reinforcer availability? Okay, kind of a trickier question, technical question. And I really doubt you would see a question worded like this on your exam. However, I think it's important as we're studying that we become more and more familiar with these more technical questions, especially if you've been studying a while and you're confident in your ability. The more you can learn and the more technical you can get, the better off you're going to be. Okay. That's how people pass on the first time. That's how people pass with so much time left, is because they go beyond just surface level RBT knowledge and get really sort of technical, right? So in this case, you have a motivating operation present, an MO, for a reinforcer, right? But the reinforcer is unavailable. What's missing to signal the reinforcer availability? First takeaway is you can have a motivating operation present, right? Increasing the value of a reinforcer. But the reinforcer doesn't necessarily need to be available. If you go on a jog and you are now thirsty because you've been deprived of water, just because the motivation to drink water is there doesn't necessarily mean the reinforcer is available. So 2, what signals reinforcer availability? Does the MO, the SD, the response, or the prompt? Well, the MO doesn't signal it's available. It makes you want it or not want it. The response is trying to gain access to the reinforcer. The prompt acts as the cue for the response, but what's really signaling the reinforcer availability is the SD. If the reinforcer is unavailable, there is no SD signaling that consequence is available. Okay. An SD is a signal that a response is going to be reinforced in the presence of that SD. Without an SD, there's no signal that the reinforcer is available. Again, a little technical, right? But we're trying to expand our knowledge and expand our understanding because it's going to make us better RBTs. It's going to make us better at the exam. Okay, how long must you and your RBT supervisor retain supervision documents for? So they've really started to look at supervision requirements and that people are tracking supervision documents, supervision hours. It's very important as an RBT you do this. Even if you have a supervisor who isn't necessarily on top of it, you need to be sure that you're collecting your supervision hours every month, you're turning in the necessary forms, and you're keeping these documents. Because if you get audited, they're going to want to see, hey, do you have supervision forms saying that you received necessary supervision? So how long does our task list say, or our supervision documents say, we need to retain supervision documents? 30 days, 1 year, 5 years, or 7 years. It's actually 7 years. It's a long time. And this is just one of those things, again, trying to make you aware of, that they want you retaining documents for 7 years. Because, again, if an audit occurs, they want you to be able to produce these documents. Now, if you don't get supervision, okay, you have to have a supervising BCBA first off to work as an RBT. If they're not giving you supervision, that's a problem. You need to make sure you're receiving that necessary supervision each month so you can stay in good standing as an RBT. On top of that, retain your documents for at least 7 years. And then Sue works from home. She often gets on calls with customers and needs privacy. Her son will engage in attention-seeking behavior whenever Sue is on a call too long. The BCBA tells Sue she should start providing attention every 10 minutes to her son, no matter what. What type of intervention is the BCBA suggesting? In most questions, there's going to be some dead giveaway words or phrases or terms. And this is no different. Kind of a long question with a lot going on. What are we worried about? What is the question asking? The question is asking about the type of intervention that the BCBA is suggesting. What does the BCBA suggest? The BCBA suggests that Sue provides attention every 10 minutes, no matter what. That no matter what is key. The son is engaging in attention-seeking behavior. What are we trying to accomplish by providing attention every 10 minutes? We're trying to abolish the need for attention. We're trying to eliminate the need for attention, okay, through motivating operations, because when Sue gets on a call, she needs the son to not be needing attention at that time. The idea is if we give the son attention when it's available, when I'm available, then when I get on a call, he's going to need attention less. What type of intervention are we suggesting? Well, if we're giving that reinforcement no matter what on a schedule, is it contingent? What is contingent? Contingent says if you do this, then you do this. Okay, you're earning the consequence, you're earning the reward, or the consequence is being given in response to something else. In this case, the consequence is happening no matter what. This is non-contingent. This is non-contingent reinforcement. It's not negative reinforcement because we're adding the attention. It's not punishment, right? We're not punishing anything. We're not necessarily reinforcing anything either, okay? We're just providing reinforcement non-contingently, okay, to try to manipulate the motivation for the attention-seeking behavior. So if we're just giving reinforcement on a schedule with no contingency in place, we are working with non-contingent reinforcement. Okay, thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe. Check out rbtexamreview.com for all of our study materials. Questions, comments, let me know. Work hard, study hard. I'll see you soon.